Hi everyone. Just going to do a little camera check. Okay, I think we're good to go. We'll just wait a few more minutes. So if you didn't get your fabric ready yet, it's 2 pieces, outside, inside, and it is reversible. So, pick 2 you like. 16 by 18, and I'm going to repeat this again after the class starts, but for those of you that want to get a little jump, so outside fabric 16 by 18, inside fabric 16 by 18. I only shape flexed interfacing on one of these. This time I'm doing it shape flexed on both of them, so if you want to go ahead and fuse your shape flex on before class starts, the interfacing shape flex, or if you want it stiffer, you can use a Decker Bond Pellon. They're both Pellon. And you want to cut that an inch smaller than your fabric, so that would be 15 by 17. And if you're using Decker Bond, you may only want to put it on one fabric. If you're doing the shape flex, you probably want to put it on 2, I would say. And then the handles, we're doing 1 piece that will cut into 2 handles. So you want a strip of both fabrics, so 2 strips, 3 inches by 18 inches. And in your sewing machine, we're going to start out with we might as well put a top stitch needle, top stitch 8012. And the top stitching is going to show, we're going to do the handles first. So it's going to show on each edge. So you might want You know, keep that in mind if it bothers you. If you're doing your shape flex, might interest you to read the instructions. I know we're not good at that, but it does say cover with a damp press cloth with iron on wool steam setting and press firmly for 10 seconds. So if this is my fabric, this is my iron, you know, count to 10 slowly. 10, 10, 10. Make sure you do those edges and watch your iron. So my iron comes out like to the end of my hand, but the actual plate of the iron is like an inch in from that edge. So you want to pay attention to that. So for those of you that, you know, want to get that ready, I left that there to remind me, so I can move that now out of the way. Put the busket back. Okay, so let's see. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Alberta. Hi, Lynn. Alberta, you made it. How is the weather down there in sunny Florida? We've got sunny New Hampshire. Let's see. What's the temperature? Oh, it's a balmy 39. But it is nice and sunny out. I think I finally remembered to put in next to the time Eastern Standard Time so people would know. I forget sometimes. I forget all the time. Apparently, I think everybody lives near me. So who's sewing along today? This is a pretty easy project. You're going to need your rotary cutting mat, ruler. I'm going to use my little 2.5-inch ruler because that's all I need. And I guess I'll use my regular. Sorry, did you hear all that racket? See, I knew I shouldn't put stuff up there. What was I thinking? All right. So rotary cutter, mat, ruler, some kind of ruler. I mean, it doesn't matter what size. You don't need a very big one because we're only cutting 2-inch squares. So, and we're going to start with our strips. So we're just about ready to go. Let's just wait one more minute. Put that over there, like that, out of the way. And I wasn't gonna hook up the other camera because you can kind of see right here the sewing. But then at the last minute, I thought, oh well. All right, I'll hook it up for those that want a close up. So we got a close up going there. Okay. Hi, Christine. Yeah, Alberta says it's sunny out, but she's not telling us what the temperature is because she's down in sunny Florida. Christine, you're sewing along with me? Good. Okay, so we're going to start out with our 2 strips. So I'm just going to pause for a second. So if I want to edit the video, I'll have a pause spot. Okay, that's long enough pause. So we're going to put right sides together. In this case, I'm using it's like a lightweight denim. So it has a right and wrong side, but one's just lighter than the other. So you just have to, I was trying to remember what I did with the shape flex. So we're going to stitch down one side. You can do a little more than a 1/4-inch seam. It's not in this case because we're making both handles at the same time so they come out the same size. So whatever you get for a seam allowance, that's fine. But I'd say a little more than a 1/4-inch. You don't want to go 1/2 inch. That's probably a little big. But you could. Depends how wide you want your handles to be. So let's go ahead and get sewing. So as I said before, I have the, oh, you know what? Hold on one second. let's go back a minute, because I announced earlier the fabric sizes and I said I would do it again. So if you have 2 fat quarters, that will work. Your outside fabric in your lining are cut 16 inches by 18 inches. And you're going to cut 1 strip of each of your fabrics, 3 inches by 18 inches. If you want your handles longer, just remember, if you want your handles 1 inch longer, add 2 inches on, because this is both handles. So if you add 1 inch on, you'll get a 1/2 inch more on each handle. And I think that was all. That's all we needed. We're using a top stitch 8012 regular sewing thread. I put yellow in today, so you could, hopefully you'll be able to see it. And so we're going to go ahead and do our seam, right sides together on our strips. And I always get my pedal ready, and then I forget I'm going to be standing up, so then it's not quite in the right place. Regular stitch on your sewing machine, regular straight stitch on your sewing machine. Make sure that both fabrics are lined up along this edge. I have the J foot in. I have a baby lock brother J foot. Janome is A foot. And I'm just gonna run my fabric along the edge of my J foot. Had to turn my speed up a little bit. And you know, I tell you, faster sewing doesn't make better sewing. Make sure your iron is plugged in and ready to go. Okay, so we got that done. Let's switch back. Get my pressing mat, because remember, if we sew, we press. How about what is it? As we sew, shall we press? Take off on the old reap and sew. Okay, I'm going to turn this way. I'm going to hope I don't melt my sewing machine. So what we want to do is, let's go ahead and press this open, just so we know that that seam is nice and flat. And you would just move yours down. I'm going to turn mine because I can't move it down. I'm trying my best to stay in camera and not melt my sewing machine at the same time. Okay, so we're just going to turn this over. And you know what? Let's press our seam open. Now that we've done that, let's press our seam open. And that's why you don't want too small of a seam allowance, because pressing it open is a lot harder when you've got a little tiny seam allowance. And for some reason, one of my guys is a little longer than the other, and we'll take care of that. That's no big deal. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, let me just check and see if there's any questions. Oh, Rhonda and Sewing Nancy are sewing along. Oh, Alberta says it's 86. Yeah, thanks, Alberta. Yes, Christine, right sides together. Hi, Jane. You haven't missed much. We're just making our handles first. And again, I'm doing one long piece for both handles, because then they'll be exactly the same. So you don't have to worry about what the seam allowance is on one handle over the seam allowance on the other handle and all that. So what we want to do now is, here's our center seam. We've pressed it open. I'm going to fold this fabric in so it's wrong sides together. So my right side is facing down, and I want to be on my pressing area. And I'm just going to fold this in, and I'm going to tuck it under that seam allowance and just make sure that it's butted up against the seam allowance. So it's just underneath. See? Okay? Come in a little bit more. So you see, there it is. There's my raw edges right there. Wrong sides together. So now I have a nice fold out here, and that's a nice finished edge. Let me zoom back. So there we go. And you would go ahead and lay yours all out. Again, I'm a little short on room, so I'm going to do one little section at a time. And you could end up being short on room sometimes. And you'd probably be using your regular big iron, because it's heavier and it'll make that crease better. And I'm just going to move this way so I don't get anybody confused and twirl it all around. And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to lift that seam allowance and just scooch that fabric so it butts up against the edge of the seam allowance. You can't go past it. And I'm doing the strap this way so that you see how it has one color on the inside, one color on the outside, because this is totally reversible. So I did my handles opposite. So if I turned it to the denim side, then the little fishies would be on the outside. So then we're just going to turn this around. And I just want to make sure that I've got that pressed well. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm just going to lift up that seam allowance and tuck that fabric underneath, and it's just butting up against the where the seam is. There's really no reason why the seam allowance is on top, except that it makes you get this fold nice and straight, as opposed to if I put this on top, then I got to guess where it needs to be. But if I just lift this up and tuck it under so that it just goes up against the seam, then I know it's good. Unless I stitched really, really crooked. So Rhonda, how's that ironing coming along? I think you should have Sewing Nancy do the ironing. Let's all take a vote. As you can tell, it's not Rhonda. Ironing isn't Rhonda's favorite thing. She once told me in class that if she knew how much ironing there was in quilting, she might not have taken it up. But she loves it now, and she makes, not the ironing, the quilting. And she makes beautiful projects. So I'm just going to flip it over. And again, you won't be lifting yours and turning it around. You'll have it on your ironing board. Okay, so now this is the back side with the, I got my fabrics peeking out. There we go. So this is the wrong side. There's the seam allowance. And then this is our right side. Nice and neat. So now all we have to do, if you quit handling it, Lorene, all we have to do is just fold it in half. And you're folding it right on that seam allowance. So I have to turn this in this direction because I can't see to the left side. So I'm folding it, and it should match up here, and it should match up here. Don't worry if you're not quite matched up there. We'll take care of that. And we just want to make sure we press this down. And I wasn't paying attention, so. So we're matching up the folded edges. And then once you have it all matched up, just run down it one more time. And like I said, if you have your bigger iron, it just creases a lot faster. Oh, Rhonda says, what makes you think she isn't? I should have known, huh? Okay. So I'm going to set my iron out of the way before I set anything melted here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew down. First, we're going to sew down the side that's open, and then we'll come back and sew down the other side. And I sew about 1/8 of an inch. Let's see if you can see it on this one. See right there? There we go. See right there? Okay, whatever you do, try to make it the same on both sides. You don't want to be too far back, because if I'm over here, then I've got this part flopping open. But don't try to get to the very, very edge, because you'll just keep falling off. And you can sew from whichever side makes you happy to sew from. So if it's easier to sew on one side than the other, that's fine, doesn't matter. So let's go sew. So I'm lining up, again, I've got my J foot on, and I'm lining up, and I'll just bring this up for a minute. So I hope I don't make you too dizzy. Hold on, sorry, the trash bucket was in the way. So I'm lining up so that, see, here's the toe of my foot, and then there's an opening. So I'm lined up with my fabric right at the left side of my right toe. How's that? Oh, sorry. I could have been a little better about that, couldn't I have? Okay, now I've got myself in my own way, so hold on one second. There we go. We don't need to lock the stitch in the beginning and end, but if you want to, you can go ahead and do that. And actually, I ended up, my fabric wanted to be a little more left than that. It kind of found its own spot. Okay. Then we're just going to turn around and do the same thing on the other side. And you'll notice it kind of feeds itself through once it's going. Okay, so this little edge that I have, see, I've got more of one than the other. I'm just going to cut that. And I want to get rid of all that fuzzy stuff. And I'm just going to make sure both ends are good. And I'm just going to sew along this edge. Oh, I got to look here. See? You see I got more of one fabric than the other. Just make sure, try to cut as straight as you can. There we go. And I'm just going to sew across each short end. And again, close to the edge. Okay, so we'll go back to the work table. See if anybody has any questions. Okay, so we sewed down both sides. And then we just sewed on the end. I just find it keeps that from getting all fuzzy and wrinkled. Then we're going to just fold it in half. So you're matching these ends. And you should have about, so I've got about 9 inches there. I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm just going to cut this end. Make sure when you fold it in half, the edges are together, and it's nice and straight going up. And I'm just going to reach in. I'm holding my fabric, pulling it down. That was a little crooked. Hopefully you'll do better. You won't be holding yours up for someone to see. And I'm just going to go back over and I'm going to stitch these 2 edges down. And I cut crooked. So you could lay it down on the mat and do it with your rotary cutter and ruler if you want. Okay, so we're just going to sew these 2 edges, and you can see me right here, so we won't flip over to the other camera. Well, which is a good thing because I just banged into the other camera. Okay, so our handles are done. We can set them aside. I'm going to move my little busket over a little bit with the scissors. I know, have to clean up my mess. Okay. So now we have our front end lining. So this is my front. And again, it's totally reversible. No seams on either side. So whoever you pick to be on the outside, you can change your mind later. And you'll notice because I cut my shape flex a little smaller, I have about a 1/2 inch all the way around. So I don't get, especially with the Decra bond, try to keep it out of the seam. Okay. You could use batting, and if you did, you'd want to quilt this, that would be really pretty too. So you got options. Just with your batting, cut it a little smaller. You can use the fusible batting instead of the shape flex or Decra bond. You could use the fusible batting. That's a little thinner than regular batting. You could use regular batting. If you're going to do that and you're going to quilt, you may want to cut it a little bigger because when you quilt, it becomes a tad smaller, or it'll just be a tad smaller when you go to put it together. Because after you quilt, you'll want to trim it. You'll want to trim it up, because when you quilt, it kind of gets a little off kilter. Okay, so we're just going to take one of our fabrics. And we're going to take it so the long side is along here. And the short side is here. And again, you can make these baskets, buskets, any size you want. Well, thanks, Alberta. You like this fabric? I kind of like it myself. I got a little, going with the fish, and I did another one that had turtles, and so I switched to flowers. Oh, and I just knocked everything on the floor. Okay, so the short way is left and right. The long way is down. Okay, what is that? Vertical, long way, short way, horizontal. And let me point out, I'll point it out on the fish, because there's no seam here, and this is a directional fabric. Besides directional this way, it's actually directional both ways. So when you turn this around, and I think the picture I did on Facebook is upside down. The fish are really upside down. So if you have a directional fabric that you need both pieces to go the same way, so cut your 16 in half and add an inch. So if you have two pieces, it would be 9 inches by 18, 9 inches by 18, do a 1/2 inch seam, and then you'll be back to the right size. But this was meant to be a little quicker. Oh, now I got to turn it back the other way so you're not staring at the upside down fish. Okay. So short side left to right. We're going to fold this up, right sides together. Okay, and this gives you the depth of your bag, which is about 9 inches. So again, you can adjust your whatever you want your busket to be. We want to make sure that we've lined up the top and the sides. And sometimes we don't cut perfect. It's okay. We'll fix that later. But we want to make sure that this lays flat. Okay? So I'm going to put a couple of clips over here. And remember, clips have a right side and a wrong side. So if you look at your clip, one side, the clear side is flat. So that's meant to be down. And this side, you can see, is curved. Just makes it a little easier when it's feeding across, especially if you have on the extension table. All right, now I have to look at this end because I'm short on that end and I couldn't see. So you'll be standing up or at least looking over your fabrics. And again, if you're a little off on the top because you cut a little bit crooked, it's okay. Just make sure this is laying flat, and we can always trim this if needed when the time comes. I just want to make sure I don't have like a crease, a crooked crease happening. So this is the busket of forgiveness. Okay, so now we're going to stitch down each side. So we're going to lock in place, stitch down, and lock. We're going to do that on both sides. So let's go sew. Yes, Christine. Christine was asking if I already attached the shape flex. Yes, we did. I did that at the beginning of the class. So yes, you would. But you can't sew it together and then put it on. So you do before you sew, make sure you have your shape flex on. And we want about a 1/2 inch seam allowance so I can see my 5/8 written on my bobbin cover. So I'm just going to be a little bit to the right of that. So I want to lock it. And then stitch. And when I get to the bottom, I can either lock in place or I can go back 3, forward 3. Then I'm going to turn around and do the other side. And whatever you use for your seam allowance, you need to pay attention because you want the same seam allowance on your lining piece. So whatever you pick for your seam allowance, this is the one time you have to be consistent. And normally I would be a 2-hand sewer, but since I'm standing up and I'm got one foot up off the floor and on the pedal, I'm using my other hand not to tip over. Okay? Yeah. So my seam is right there. I'm going to set that aside. Let's go back to the work table. And we're going to get our other fabric, right sides together. And you'll know, because if you've put shape flex or some kind of interfacing on it, you'll know that's the wrong side. So right sides together. And again, the longer part is this way, shorter that way. So that's your 16 inches there. And if you want a shorter busket, this is the part that you would make shorter. I know it probably sounds silly, but sometimes you might want to like cut it to the size and then fold it and go, okay, now I know how I make my basket a little shorter. I'll just take some off one side. And if this, especially the shape flex, oh look, I didn't iron that on well, did I? Especially the shape flex, it can be in the seam. It's pretty thin. So let me just give that a quick. And I generally always, after I'm done pressing my shape flex or whatever it is fused on, I go around the edges because the edges, for me, seem to be the place where I don't fuse like I should, and there's a perfect example. It doesn't hurt to stop and fix something. Okay, so again, right sides together. You can pin or clip. Just want to make sure this is nice and smooth. We don't need to like press a crease into this because it's the middle of the bottom. Try to be straight along this edge as well. And again, we might not cut perfect. It's okay. It's not our prom dress, just a busket. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and do the same exact thing. We're going to sew down this side and then sew down this side. So let's go sew. Remember, you want to pick that same distance that you did on your outside fabric or whichever other fabric it is. So I know how much my fabric is past my foot. And remember, I was following that 5/8. I was to the left of that 5/8. So I want to stay the same. And I forgot I should have locked at the beginning. So make sure you lock it. Make sure you lock at the beginning. Hitting the wrong button there. And I'm just going to go up and do a little stitch again, because when we're putting the two fabrics together, I'm going to be pulling on that seam. So I just want to make sure that I just do a little locking stitch there. Come forward a little bit. That's all I need. Oh, wrong petal. And then I'm going to do the other side, so I just have to flip it over. And I'm just making sure everything's lined up. This time I'll remember to lock in place, or 3 forward, 3 back. And lock again. And back to the work table we go. Sorry about that. I couldn't see where the cursor of my mouse was. Okay, so I have the fold facing towards me. Let's see if I might be able to do that this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut out a 2-inch square, but I want you to measure not from the edge, but from wherever your seam allowance is, 2 inches over. So I'm going to take my little ruler, and I have to pay attention. One side has a half and one doesn't. So I want to take my 2-inch. So here's my 2-inch line here and here. This one is going to go right where my stitching is. And then the other 2 inches is right along the fold. See if I can come in a little bit. Yeah, if I come in too far, then I end up being too far away, moving too far away from the camera. Okay, so 2 inches at the edge of my fold, and then 2 inches this way in line with my seam allowance. But I need the ruler because I need to cut off the seam allowance as well. But I want to measure my 2 inches from the seam allowance. From the seam in, not from the edge of the fabric. So at my seam, at my fold. And you notice when I get to the corner, I just do this. I'm not going to hack back and forth and look like the hedgehog got it. And must be getting to be time for a new blade. So you remember I told you before how you should pull your fabric away before your ruler. Oh, that's a perfect example of that. I've got like one thread that's just hanging on for dear life. There we go. Okay, so it's going to look a little rectangular because your eye's going all the way out here, but the 2 inches is really from where my seam is. And I'm going to turn around, or I'll just flip it over for you, because then you're doing the exact same thing. And again, I'm measuring 2 inches to the fold up, 2 inches over from my stitching. And if you cut just a tad in, it's okay, because we're going to have some of it will be in the seam allowance. I just got, must be a spot on my rotary that just one little spot keeps not cutting. Okay, and I'm going to set that aside for a minute, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. So let me move this out of the way there. Okay, my fold is down here. Here's my fold. Again, 2 inches. 2 inches at the fold, 2 inches at the stitching line. This one will be a little easier because it's not the double layer of denim. There we go. That would be the proper way to do it. And I'm just going to flip this over, because if I flip it over, I'm essentially to my eyeball, I'm cutting the exact same way again. I don't have to like realign my eyeball thinking. 2 inches, whoop, 2 inches at the fold, 2 inches at the stitching. Oh, that one thread. Okay? So let me set that one over there for a minute. So now everybody's cut. Let me just check and see if there's any questions. Take a sip of tea. Okay. If you insist, Christine, I'll take a sip of tea. Okay, did everybody have their sip of tea? Okay, so we need a couple of clips, and what we're going to do is we need to seam this. This is our boxed bottom. So I think what we should do, to make it a little easier, I'm going to do a little pressing, because I want to press this side seam open. So I'm just going to move it down a little ways. See, make sure you can still see. I don't want to crease this, but I want to press this seam open. And while I'm at it, I just go ahead and press the other side open. So I'm just moving it in a little bit. And I'm going to turn this around because, or I'll just turn it around, because it's easier to iron with the point of your iron coming in than trying to put your whole iron down over here. So I'm just going to turn it. Let me see if I can, there we go. So see, if I came in from this way, I'm making a big mess here. But if I come from this side and just come in with the point of my iron, I'm not getting in the way of anything else. Does that make sense? Okay? So what we want to do is we want to fold this, and it should automatically go just like that. The seam should pretty well be in the center. And you should be able to eyeball that, because if you go the edge to the edge, fold evenly, this is in the center. I just want to make sure I line up with the back. And this time I'm going to use my pins. And I'm going to pin, remember I always pin after the seam. I don't want to be pinning in the seam. And 2 pins is plenty. Okay? And then I can go ahead while I'm at it, and I can do the other side. So see, I'm lining it up. So when these 2 edges are together, then the seam should be right in the middle. There we go. Okay? Now, whatever seam allowance you use here, you're going to use on all your corners so everything comes out the same. If you have the tendency, and this happens a lot, that your lining just feels a little bigger than it should, then you could probably take a little more stitching, a little deeper seam on the lining than on the outside. And I mean, just eighth of an inch more. But don't do that unless there's an issue. Just make a note of it for the next basket. So let's go sew. And I have yellow thread in, and I'm just going to leave it in so you can see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm onto the fabric by maybe half an inch, and then I'm going to sew backwards and then come forward. I find that's easier than, especially if you have a heavier fabric, than trying to catch and sew right at the edge. Just come on a little ways, go back to the edge, and then come forward. And you notice I always hold my hand down when I'm pulling a pin out. I want to slow down here, make sure that I don't turn this seam allowance up. And I'm using the edge of my foot, my J foot, for my seam allowance distance. And I'm going to get to the other end, and I'll go ahead and stitch back and cut my thread. Because for some reason I got a thing about having that thread hang at that edge. So, you see that? Look, I turned down my sewing machine light because it flares. Let me put the other light on. Hold on. Oh, you don't want it to be too glary. There you go. Okay? And then we're just going to go ahead and do the other side. Make sure, before you lay it down, that the seam allowance side didn't go up, scoot up on you past the back fabric. Because it might want to do that. So again, oops, sorry, I bumped the camera. I came in just a little bit. I can come in actually a little bit more. I'm lined up with this edge. You can see I'm lined up with this edge. Now, I can stitch forward just to make sure I got everything where it's supposed to be, because my needle will go in. I call that my third hand. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch back till I see the edge of the fabric, and then come forward. Stop when you get near that seam allowance to make sure it stays nice and flat. I'm at the edge. I'm going to go ahead and stitch backwards. And every machine has a, go backwards button. Looks like that. And if you're wondering this, if you have this button, this is the stitch in place lock button. It does other things, but for the moment, that's good enough to know. And there's your back. So you can pick either one of those. Okay. So back to the work table. And let me see the chat. Oh, there you go. So Stephanie Jane, used her little, it's her little ham, and I'll have to get mine out another time. So a ham looks like a stuffed ham, only it's wool, or it's a heavier fabric, and it's made for when you need to press something that's not necessarily flat. And Jane now has her little ham, except it's sort of like a rectangle, but it's stuffed. It's probably like this size around. And it's good for going in sleeves and things, but it's also good for like getting on here. Instead of ever getting this all in your way, you would put your ham or your other press in. Of course, this would be hanging off under your ironing board to press that. Good job, Jane. That was probably more than you wanted me to tell everyone. And we're going to go ahead and do a little press because we sewed. And now we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to set this aside. I have to find a place to set mine aside. And now we're going to do the same thing with our outside fabric or lining fabric or whichever one you have left. And again, Jane's going to use her little ham. I wish I had mine nearby. And instead of having to do this, it's like a round thing like this. It's round like a big sausage. We'll call it the big sausage. And that way she doesn't have to worry about whether she won't crease these because her little ham will take care of that. I'll have to remember to get out my little ham. So I'm just remember we pressed our seams open on our other piece? So I'm just doing the same thing again. And the same exact thing here. Let's see if you can. So I'm going to just have the nose of my iron going in the little area there. Jane, you'll have to take a picture of pressing with your little ham, and we'll put it on Facebook so everyone can see it. A little ham photo. Oh, and I'm not paying attention like I should be. There we go. I pressed a crease in instead of making it flat. There we go. Okay, so you've pressed your two seams open. We're going to do the exact same thing again. I'm just going to put my fingers right here on each edge and make sure the back and front line up. This part right here wants to pop up a little higher. So that's why when I put my pins in, I put this one in first. Okay? Make sure that your fabrics are even at the top. Now, see, now this practically gets in line all by itself. And this is the one that I pressed the crease in, so I gotta press that crease out. If you can't see my pressing for a minute, I apologize. I just want to make sure I get that. Okay, then I want to make sure I'm lined up across. And I will show you, if I can, I'm going to show you where I cut in a little further than I should have, but it'll be in my seam allowance. So there you go. See it right there? Can you see that little? See it? But my seam allowance is going to be along here. So we'll be okay. So just be careful when you're doing that. So we're ready to sew. We've got both sides pinned. So you know the drill. Line up your, almost forgot what I had for my seam allowance. I remember now I lined up with the edge of my foot. I came in a little ways, so now I can just go backwards. So let me back, sorry. have to go the other way. There we go. So I'm just going to go backwards. And I'm going to come forward a little bit before I take that pin out. And my pin cushion is right here. Oh, if I bump the camera, I'm sorry. Go to my edge. Back up and cut. And I'm just going to flip around to the other side. And you notice I have my seam allowances always on top so I can make sure that it doesn't flip back on me. Oh, almost hit the wrong button. Making sure I keep that seam allowance opened up and flat. Stitching back at the end. Oh, I guess I'll go a couple more. And let's see if I can show you. Let's see, it might be too white, but there's my little slit that I made, and see my seam allowance is like 1/8 of an inch below that. Okay, so back to the work table, or probably in your case the ironing board. There's a little press. Little press. Okay, we're almost done. So we got 2 baskets. So now we got to put our handles on. So I'm going to put my handles on my lining. And it really doesn't matter which. I just do it on my lining, especially where I got the denim. And what we want to do is we want to, let's see if I can flatten that out. There we go. So we want to measure over about 2 inches and make a mark. So you can either use your ruler and go over, or you could, if you're using your cutting mat, you put your seam on the line and go over 2 inches. I had to turn the page of my instructions, so I'd made sure I'm not forgetting anything. Yeah, that's not helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to use the cutting mat, and I'm going to mark a line 2 inches, and then on this side 2 inches. Okay, so you could use your ruler, but if you have your cutting mat right there, it's pretty easy. Seam 2 inches, 2 inches. Oh. And we're going to flip it over to the other side. Let me get it out of the way again. Oh. Put my seam allowances on the line of my grid. I'm trying to do this so you can see. and I'm going to mark it 1, 2, and 1, 2. Okay, can you see my little marks right there? All right. Yeah, I threw that in the wrong place. I'd have been in trouble for that. Let me just check text. Let me check the messages. Okay, so everybody's good so far? Thank you, Jane. And again, you know, I'm kind of going along slow. When you're doing them by yourself, you're not going to be quite this slow at it. But I just want to make sure that nobody falls too far behind. So now, I always have to think about this. So, which way do you want your handles to show? So I want my handles. I want my inside fabric or my outside fabric to show on the inside like this is. So you have to decide that. So what I do is, and sometimes it takes me 6 tries before I get it right. So first of all, I just put it, I'm not worrying about where I'm putting it down. I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to hold my handle up thinking, no, I don't want to do that. I want it to be opposite of that. Wait a minute. Does it matter? Yeah, so I don't want it this way, because when I put my handle up, all right, see, always takes me a minute here. All right, let me think about this. So if I have my handle here and I lift it up, it would be the wrong way too. Let me see if I can show you on this one. So if our handle is down, we want to see on top this same fabric, so that when we lift it up, or when we turn it, wrong side out, or inside out, or which way, see, now this is out on the outside. So you have to decide which way you want it. But when you're laying your handle down on your fabric and you want it opposite, then do you see how both fabrics are facing up? But they'll be opposite to the outside. Does that make sense? Yeah. Let me do this. And because I know some of you like to take a picture. So if you want to, on your phone, if you want to take a quick picture where it shows, I'll put my finger where the handles are. So it shows the handles, the same fabric, they're both facing up to get the opposite when you open it up. Okay? You see that okay? Take a quick picture. There you go. Okay. So I want to have, I got too much stuff now. I want to have the same fabric showing is, so this is my lining fabric. My handle lining fabric they both should be showing. So when we open this up, it'll be in the right direction. And now the spacing of it is going to be kind of up to you. So you can have, I did the 2-inch, so you can be totally inside the 2-inch, which puts your handles a little close together. I think I did mine so it was halfway. So if you look at my edge, I'm about 1 inch from that edge. Okay, and the reason I marked it at the 2 was to give you the opportunity to move your handle in and out however you want to do it. So if you like it at 1 inch, mark it at the 1 inch and put this side against it. So I'm just going to put mine so the line is halfway. So again, if you want to go ahead and mark 1 inch and 1 inch, go ahead. But I wanted you to have that opportunity to see exactly where you wanted your handle. If you want it further apart and you want a longer handle, you can cut it longer. And remember, if you're adding an inch, add 2 to that long strip because you're making 2. But we couldn't get a bigger handle with the fat quarter. So if you want a longer handle, you either have to make your bag, I think it's 15 by 18, because you're going to need that 22 length to get the handle long enough. I know that's probably way more information than you were looking for. So because I don't have a lot of handle to spare, I'm lining my handle up with this edge. And I'm going to pin it, and I'll hold it up in a second. I want to make sure that it stays straight in line with this edge. And you can line it up again when you get to the sewing machine, because we're going to stitch the handles down before we close the bag up so that we know the handles are in the right place. And then I'm going to come around to the other side and do the same. Whatever distance you did, do the same. Okay, mine looks like it's off. So I'm going to mark mine at the 1 inch, just to make it easier. So if I mark the 1 inch, and remember I've got my seam allowance on the line, so 1 inch and 1 inch. If you have a longer handle and you don't need all the length, just move the end of your handle past your fabric. We can trim that off afterwards. And I put my pin out far enough that I don't have to unpin when I'm stitching, because it will get away from me. So see how this guy's a little crooked? That'll be fine. When I get to the sewing machine, I'll straighten it out. And I'll straighten it out, because you're doing one at a time. So let's go to the other side. And now I know that I want mine at 1 inch, the edge to be at the 1 inch. I can go ahead and mark that 1 inch and 1 inch. And I want my other handle the exact same way. So whatever way your handle is, you want them both to be the same. Because 2 wrongs will make a right in this case. Okay, so I put the side of my strap at that 1 inch mark. So each part of the handle is 1 inch from that center. And now we're going to go sew. Okay, why are we getting fuzzy? Too much light, apparently. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on my handle I'm going to stay about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge because I don't want this stitching to show when I do my final seam. Let's see if I can keep that open. Come on, stay over there. So I'm going to start stitching here. I'm going to go across, and I'm just going to keep going right across. I'm going to come across this handle, then I'm going to go back. And then I'll do a locking stitch, but I'll be off of all the handle. Okay? There's no sense in back and forth, stop, come over, back and forth, stop. You can stitch right along there, it'll be fine. Okay? So the only thing I'm concerned with right now is making sure this handle stays parallel with my seam line. That's my only job right now. Well, besides sewing. I'm going to start on my strap, but when I end, I'm going to come off my strap. And I want to make sure that I stay inside my seam allowance. So if my seam allowance was going to be the edge of my foot, I want to make sure now my fabric's to the left of the edge of my foot. And I don't need to lock this one yet because I'm going to stitch right over it again. Okay? Then I'm going to start to pay attention. And let me see if I can open this up far enough. I need to start to pay attention now to this strap. I'm past the other strap. I want to start to pay attention to make sure that this strap is lined up parallel to that seam. And I can sew off to the strap a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to hit the camera. Let's see if we make sure that stays in focus. So I'm going to turn around and come back. Now I'm going to take my pins out. And even though I've sewn, I want to still make sure that because this wants to pull this way, I still want to make sure that this strap right here is lined up with my seam allowance. I don't care what's happening over with the other side of the strap. I just care about this one part of the strap or handle. Okay, then I can now pay attention to this side of the handle and again make sure I'm parallel with that seam. And I'm going to stitch right over and off, and I can just do a little locking stitch. Oh, sorry. Oh. Wrong button there. Okay? So can you see? I stitched right across. So I started, stitched across, came back again, and locked. Now we'll do the same on the other side. So all that matters is this part of the handle. Strap, handle, whatever I call it from one minute to the next. I want to make sure that I'm on the handle. And then I'm going to pull my handle so that it is lined up parallel with that seam. If you need to take your pin out, take it out because you may have pinned a little crooked. That's okay. Okay. Now I'm going to stitch across. And now I want to pay attention to this side of my handle. And again, and I can see I'm off my mark. I want to make sure that my handle is parallel to my seam. And I just stitched off the handle, that's okay. I'm going to turn it around carefully, but I'm not just going to stitch back. I'm again going to make sure that my fabric is laying nice and flat and my handle is still parallel. And all I did was come over to my right side and pull the fabric so it's laying nice and flat. And as I get closer to my other handle, I'm going to take that pin out. And I'm going to again make sure that my fabric's nice and flat and my handle is parallel to the seam. And I do want to stitch off of the handle so that I can do my back stitch without having to go through all that fabric. Okay, so let's go back to the work table, see if there's any questions. Everybody's good? So there's my handles. And isn't it easier just to stitch across and stitch back than to stitch, stitch, and stop and start and all that stuff? Okay. So we have our outside fabric is wrong side out. So we need to have our lining fabric right side out, because we need to have right sides together. And I'm just pushing out my little corners there. And we can, while we're at this stage, do a little press. And all I want to do is I want to press my boxed part so it's nice and flat. So I stuck my fingers are in the corners right here to push it out and lay it nice and flat. And this works far better with the bigger, heavier iron. And you can do this after it's together too, that's fine. But while we're at it, again, I pushed my fingers up in those corners. If you need to use your turning tool, that's fine. And we had already done this one, so we're all set. We'll do it again when it's all done. Okay, so we need to have right sides together. Make sure you leave the handles down like they are. So we're going to put the lining, right side of the lining to the right side of the outside of the bag. We're going to find where the two seams are. And put in a couple of pins. Don't pin where the handle is, because that's way too much fabric to have to go through. So I'm going to put a pin on either side of the seam allowance for the moment. Then I'm going to come around to the other side. Put the rest of the bag in, lining. Handles inside, because you want the handle on the right side, so it's between the right side, so when you open it up, you'll be able to use it. If you had it on this side, it would be inside of the lining. You'd never see it again. lined up the two seams, jab myself with a pin, now this is where you're going to see if you sewed all your seams the same. So let's go in, let's get it, put our hands inside the bag and get our corners of both the lining and the outside lined up together. Okay, so now if your lining was a lot bigger, then you didn't take a big enough seam, and it's a little hard to do it now because you boxed the seam, but you could seam in a little bit and then come out. So in other words, you'd be stitching along, and then you'd go back in to meet the other seam, but you should be okay. And I'm going to put another pin on the other side of the handle because that handle wants to pull in. And then I'm just going to go back to this side and line up. Here's my handle right there. And I'm going to put a pin in just a little bit after it, because the handle wants to pull that fabric down. Okay, so if we look at this, the rest of it should be lining up pretty well. So what we want to do is we want to at least put a pin in the middle. And we want to put a pin in the middle on the other side. And of course, you're lining your two fabrics up along here. Okay, so if the lining or the outside is a bit bigger, one bigger than the other, you're going to have to turn this inside out or right side out and have the fabric that's bigger on the inside. Now, which way are we going to do this? No, I'm going to stitch from in here. So whatever the fabric that's looser would be on the side where the feed dogs are. So you may take your free arm off and use that. I don't, because I get tangled up in it. I sew from on top. So whichever way you want to do it, the fabric that's a little bigger needs to be next to the feed dogs. Okay? Now, the other thing we need to remember is we can't just sew around. We'll never get it open again. So we're going to pick one side or the other to have our opening. Okay, so here's the handles right here. And I don't want to end next to the handles. So I'm going to come in, and I am about, let me measure it this way so I can see. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm about 5 inches from the seam allowance. And I'm going to put 2 pins right together like they're best friends. Okay? This always tells me, because I do the same thing every time. This tells me when I see 2 pins together, that means I stop sewing. Okay, so if you clipped your way around, still use the 2 pins where you need to stop sewing. Now, I want to have an opening of about, and the opening's going to depend on what you used for interfacing. So if you use batting, you'd want probably a bigger opening. I'm going to have an opening about, I'm going to say 4 inches. So I'm going to move that middle pin I had to the 4 inches from these 2 pins. Can you see my pins? So here's my stop. here's my start. I don't need to put 2 pins where I start because I should be able to remember that between right now and when I go sew. Where this one, I'm coming around whistling and, singing row, row, row your boat, and I'll go right past this and around. So it's the stopping that we forget to do, not the starting. But if you want to, you can put 2 pins there. The thing is the second we put this under the machine and drop the needle, this pin's coming out right away, because we're going to get as close to this pin as we can. Now, if you're 4.5 inches, that's okay, but don't make it like 8 inches. You don't, trust me, I did one the other day and I swear I had like a 2.5 inch opening, and it just took me a little longer to get it through the other side, but it worked out all right. The other thing we want to remember is we need to have a locking stitch. And this time I want to do the 3 forward, 3 back, 3 forward. And then when I come around to the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stop and go 3 back, 3 forward, and I'm going to go 3 back again. Because we're going to be tugging on this area when we turn it right side out, and we don't want it to rip apart. The seam allowance should be about 1/2 inch, maybe a little less. But whatever it is, it is. It doesn't have to match anything else. The only thing it has to be is a bigger seam allowance than where you stitched on those handles, because you don't want that stitching to show. I'm getting a little dry. I have to have a drink again. Hey, Jane, are you drinking your water? Okay, so we all know what we're doing. I'm going to stitch this way. I can't turn it this way because you can't see. But I'm sitting over there. I'm stitching this way. And I'm just going to keep coming around, or whichever way it is. I think it's this way. If you want to use your free arm, then you'll be stitching from up here, and this will be underneath. Okay? It's a personal preference. I just find with the free arm, I spend more time tugging it around than I do when it's on the top. So it's entirely up to you which way you do it. I say try both ways and see which one you like better. Okay, so there's my 2 pins where I'm going to stop. Here's my pin where I'm going to start. And hopefully I can remember till I get to my machine, which is really right here, that this is where I'm starting. So we ready to go? Let me make sure there's no questions. We good? And this is the last stitching we have to do. And like I said, I'm going slow. And some of you are probably going, yeah, come on, let's go. But some of you aren't. So if you're watching this later, speed ahead, to the next section, or go slower, or stop it, whatever you need to do. But I just don't want you to be in a big rush of worrying about whether you get it done or not. So again, here's where I'm starting. Okay? So let's go sew. Now I got to move out the junk from behind my machine because I need room. Okay, so if you forgot where your pins are, it's going to be easy. Here's my 2 pins. I just have to mosey down that 4 inches to my 1 pin. Okay? So I'm going to get pretty close to where my 1 pin is. And I'm going to look on here because I think I'm going to take almost a 1/2 inch seam. So I've got, I'm going to find what my pin cushion was. I've got, let me show you. I've got, can you see the distance I have of fabric past the edge of my foot? And here's my 5/8. You see that white line? There's the 5/8, and I'm about 1/8 away from that. You can put a seam guide on, whatever you want to do, but I'm going to follow, my eye is going to follow to keep that same amount of fabric right of my foot. Okay? Trying to set you down gently. Okay, we can come in a little bit, I guess. And I'm going to hit my pedal, because I always have my pivot on. So I want to make sure I've got my third hand is helping me out. And remember, I want to stitch forward a little bit. So about 3 stitches, then I'm going to go back. I went back 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. And my eye is right here where this fabric is. So now, see, I can just, trying to do this without making the camera get all wobbly. So I can easily see where I need to sew. Now, can you see that little bunch right there? Let me see if I can get up a little closer. Okay, I think you can see there's like a bunch right there. That's my handle trying to go that way. So I'm going to sew a little closer. Take that pin out, and I'm going to make sure that I lift my lining fabric up and just get that handle fabric even here. So I'm holding it right here. Normally I would do this, but I think I can do that without getting in your way too much. Oh, see, I bumped the camera. The camera's in front of me, so let me see. I'm trying to get in between the fabrics, the 2 fabrics, so I can get that. There we go. That handle fabric up. And I can see where my stitching holding that handle was, so it's well to the right of me. I'm fine. I'm just going to come over past the handle, take that pin out. Okay. I'm coming up to the other, and normally there we go. But see if you can see. Wait a minute, I'm going to back up for a second. Let's back up. Can you see how much fabric I can easily see doing it this way? Now again, there's that bunch of that handle. So I'm just going to get past my seam. And I'm at the beginning of my handle. I know I went right by my pin. And now I'm going to take my other pin out. And I'm going to reach inside. So see, I'm between the 2 fabrics. I'm holding my bottom fabric down, and I'm pulling that handle up. And I'm holding it in place. There we go, till I get over it. And that's only because that handle is a little shorter. So again, my eye is staying right where the fabric is a little past the, hold on, let me make sure it focuses in there. A little past the foot. Oop. Trying to do this without getting too much of my hands in your way. And I'm coming up to the other handle now. And again, I've got that same, you'll see yours, it's making a ripple because that handle is not behaving itself. So I just want to get between the 2 fabrics, and I'm just giving it a tug, and then tugging to the right. And I'm coming up to the other end of the other handle. Get my pin out of the way. This handle is behaving a little better, but I just want to be sure I want to make sure that fabric is nice and flat. I don't want to sew in a crease. And here's my 2 pins. Here's my 2 pins. So I'm going to sew up to my 2 pins. And then I'm going to sew back and give it a cut. Okay? Did everybody get through that? Okay, so what happened while I was gone? Okay, seam allowance, got it. Okay, I must have missed something somewhere along the way. You guys are all good? Now I know I had the camera in the way, but did you try sewing with the fabric above instead of underneath? I'd be curious if anybody tried that and if they found it easier. I do. And again, it's a personal preference thing. You don't have to do as I do. Okay. So before we turn this out, we want to press, here's my opening right here. So I want to press this fabric back like I was opening my seam allowance, because then this is the easiest time to press it so that it'll be right and it'll be straight when we turn it right side out. That's our hope and our dream. Okay? So if I start back here where the seam allowance is, and I start over here where the seam allowance is, and just work my way across, this is the part where there's no stitching. Okay? So it looks like we're pressing the seam allowance open. Okay? Then I'm gonna, let's see if we can flip it over and do it this way. No, we'll do it this way. Trying to see which is easier for you to see. But now I've got to do the other fabric. So I just need to, I'm folding my seam allowance back. You see how we're this way? We're folding my seam allowance back. So they should be even across here. Okay? And while I'm at it, I'm just going to give my seam a little press. Oh. And I'm back at the beginning already. Now you don't have to fold the whole thing back, just the part where the opening is. Okay, are we good there? Oh, Christine, you tried it the same way I did? Cool. Hope you liked it. Okay, so we gave this a nice press. This is our opening right here. Almost couldn't see where it was. Right here, okay? If a tad of your front fabric shows, it's better than having your back fabric show. Okay, so don't fuss with it too much. Okay, if your handles were longer, now's the time you'd cut those off. Okay, so now we're going to turn this right side out. So I'm going to reach in as far as I can. And I'm just going to work it. See, I'm taking my thumbs, which it kills my thumbs, but that's okay, and pushing it out. And see how you're putting the stress on those 2 spots where we stopped sewing? So that's why we wanted to lock those edges. Okay. You'll get to a certain point and it'll just all of a sudden everything's fine. But if you need to get some of that fabric out of your way, And see, here we go. And of course now it's all wrinkly after we made it all nice and neat. And this is where Jane's ham's gonna come, her little hammy is gonna come into play, because she can, I don't know if she can lay it over, lay the ham underneath. But remember, we want to press this open this way, so that when we turn these together, if we don't, you'll get like a little ridgy thing going on. We want it to be nice and flat. So let's try to be flat underneath. And you don't have to line up this one with the one underneath. We're only working with this one right now. Stay away from your edges. We don't need to crease anything. And we just want to give this a press so it flattens out that seam. And we're on the side that's not open. Okay? I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to try to make this as flat as possible. But can you see here? Look, here's our opening. You see how they should be laying nicely together. And you don't have to fight with trying to fold it and get it right. It's already folded for you. So see, there's my opening. But it lays right, they lay even to each other. And then I want to get into these sides. Where the handles are. And you can handle be this way or this way, depending on how you're looking. And I'm just trying to get this all nice and flat. And then around to the other side. And it's a good time to trim out those threads. Okay, now let's push it inside. So and it doesn't matter which one. If you want to, let me see, we're going to be stitching, I'm going to be stitching from, no, I'm going to leave it inside out, because again, I'm going to be stitching from in here. So I want to make sure that I turn this down. And let's see. And I don't want my lining fabric to show on the right side, but I don't mind if my right side, my outside fabric shows on my lining side. And I'm just going around and making sure this is nice and flat before I stitch it. I'm trying to do it so you can see it, only I can't. Oh, hi. So my lining was shown a little bit, so I just kind of scooched that forward. So I'll come in, see if I can get it so you can see. There we go. And I give it a good steam too, because you want to flatten out those seams. And just keep going around. So can you see here? See how you can see a little bit of that outside? So when I turn it right side out, the lining isn't showing. But if I reversed it and this was showing a little bit, I'm okay with that because it looks like a pretty trim. But you want it as even as possible. I just want you to remember this is a busket. It's not your prom dress. Now I'm at the opening, so I want to make sure that I get all this fabric pushed in because the opening's not attached to anything. So I don't want it way up. I want it as even as possible. So say I want it as even as possible. Then flip it down. I know it's hard for you to see inside the slot, but hopefully you can see inside of yours. And once I have it like I want it, press this way so you don't move it. Don't be ironing around because then you can move it out of where you spent the time getting it right. Yeah, okay, so see how this is all built up? I'm just going to push it down. Oh, and I don't want my lining fabric showing. Okay, so I think I'm just about done with my pressing. So once you're done with your pressing, we're ready to do our last top stitching. Now let's see. Oh, Jane said she got her little hammy. We're gonna call him Hammy. She got her hammy on sale. So she says it's paid for itself just in one class. Okay, so now just look around and make sure it's nice and flat all the way around. And if your outside fabric is on the inside, just make sure that your lining fabric isn't showing up here. Okay, so we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to straight stitch about a little more than we did on the handles. We don't want to be too far in because we don't want that opening to gap. So I'm going to flip this over because my opening is here because I'd like to take care of that first. So I'm going to, because it wants to get away from me, I'm going to put a couple pins in. I'm going to start stitching probably in here and come by, but I want to make sure that I address and pay attention to that opening. So if you're like me, you can pay attention to things when you start, but if it was way over here, by the time I got around here, I'd have forgotten I was supposed to pay attention to that. Okay? You could also put steamer seam in there to close it if you wanted to. Okay? And see, look, there's our handles. It worked. I was worried there for a while. So I guess if I turned them out, they'd be that way, but we really want them in, this part in. So hopefully you took a picture of that handle. I have to take a minute tea break here. Water time. Okay, we ready? So I just put a couple pins where that opening is. I'm going to start before the seam or after the seam. Don't start on the seam. You're just asking for trouble. So we can start before or after. So I don't know. I'm going to go before the seam, start. I'm not going to lock it because I'm going to come around and stitch over that. So I'm going to stitch all the way around, come over where I started, and then I will lock it in place. So we okay? All right, let's go sew. It's our last sewing. Are you excited? Okay, let's make sure the focus is working. Remember I said, here's my 2 pins. So I'm going to work my way back. And I don't want to start on the handle either. My machine went to sleep. I left it for so long. So I'm past the handle, but I'm before the seam. Okay? And I'm going to run this about when my fabric is to the inside edge of the right toe of my foot. And you may find that your feed it'll move it over just a tad. Yeah, I'm going to go over just a tad. Okay, I don't have to double stitch on my handles. We did that already when we attached it. So that's 2 rows of stitching. This is the 3rd row of stitching. That should be plenty enough. So I'm just going to turn my bag, my basket, my busket, because I want it nice and flat ahead, and stitch around. And I just want to try to make sure I keep everything nice and flat. Here's my pins for where my opening is, so I know I've got to make sure I pay attention. Don't do anything crazy. Oh, did I hit the camera again? But you see, when I turn my, oh, watch my hands for a second. When I turn my basket nice and flat, I can go a long way before I have to turn my fabric again. I don't need a lot of fabric behind the needle. I want more of the fabric in front of the needle. All right, and the more I try not to have my hands in your way, the more I get them in your way. Well, make sure you get rid of whatever little threads are poking out as you go, because you'll forget about it later on. And you're going to have a hand here and a hand here. I can do that, I guess. There we go. I think I'm out of your way. I'm almost done. So I'm coming around to where I started. Pardon my hand again for a minute here. And I want to get rid of, oop, that got blurry, didn't it? I want to get rid of the thread where I started, the extra thread. And I want to make sure that I stitch right over where I started. And then I'm going to lock my stitch. And we're done. Oh, hit my toe. Oh. Okay, you can give it another press if you like. So now I can turn it right side out. And there we are. So again, it's reversible. Make sure you get rid of all your little threads. So I hope you guys that, oh, and if you feel it's a little thick here, just take it over to the iron, just kind of squeeze it flat and just give it another press. But we pressed quite a bit along the way, so it's pretty well good to go. Looks nice inside. No seams. I got some odd threads in there. So let me just wait for a minute, see if anybody has any questions. I think now this is my new favorite. So this is going to be my basket. And I'm not, I don't necessarily always like to have a real stiff bag or basket because sometimes I might want to fold it up and put it away. So it's entirely up to you to try it out. You know, it's a couple of fat quarters. Try it. If this is not heavy enough or stiff enough for you, then try using one layer of Decker Bond, and I would put that on the lining. And then if you really want it stiffer, then do both fabrics with Decker Bond. And then it's going to stand up really stiff, but you won't be able to fold it up. I mean, you could, I guess, if you crushed it. But if I want to put some, if I'm working on a crochet project or something, it works perfectly fine for me. So let me see if anybody has any questions. And before I forget, let's see, I have to, I have to work again next Saturday. So I'm trying to decide, let's go with 1:30 again next Saturday, just to be on the safe side, because I have to do a virtual online class embroidery, and then I have to reset up all over again, and I don't want to be late. I would rather say now, let's start at 1:30. I'll make a note of it on Miss Loreens Schoolhouse Facebook page during the week. And no, I have no clue what we're going to do. No clue, because I sometimes I get halfway through a project and I go, yeah, let's do that another time. So thanks again, everybody, for joining in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, would you please subscribe to Miss Loreens Schoolhouse and hit the little bell thing, I think it is, so that you'll get notification when I come online or load something up onto YouTube. And of course, always, give me a thumbs up if you can. And we'll pass on the thumbs down as always. So again, thanks everyone for joining in. If you want to, put your pictures of your buskets on Miss Loreens Schoolhouse Facebook channel, because everybody likes to see what everyone else is doing. If you don't want to put it up yourself, then you can send it to me at schoolhouse@therightspot.com. THERIGHTSPOT.com. And again, thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks for sewing along. Thanks for watching. Oh, Jane did watermelon fabric. We'll have to see a picture of that. Oh, and hi, Cammie. Okay, so thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your weekend. I'll see you either next Saturday or for sewing on Thursday night. Thanks again, and have a great day.